Hello, everyone, and welcome to PR Explored, the PR podcast where we delve into trends and topics related to public relations. I'm your host, Michelle Garrett, a PR consultant and writer. And today I have with me my guest, Kelley Rodriguez, who's editor in chief of Refrigerated and Frozen Foods, which is part of BNP Media. Hello, Kelley. Welcome.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for having me.
I'm so happy to have you today. I know a lot of people do not understand the world of trade media, but it is part of your everyday life and my everyday life. And I would love, as we kind of kick off here before we start getting into our questions, if you would just tell us a little bit about you and your background and anything that you would like to share.
Sure. I'm Kelley Rodriguez. I currently serve as editor in chief of Refrigerated and Frozen Foods, which, as Michelle said, is a BNP publication or brand, as we like to call ourselves nowadays. So I represent and cover the cold and frozen processing, manufacturing, and distribution of foods in primarily the United States, but internationally as well. My background is largely in commercial media. So I hold a bachelor's in journalism, a bachelor's in broadcasting from Otterbein University, and a master's in library and information science. I have held a variety of roles in print, broadcast, radio, uh, and um, nonprofit before taking this role about 5 years ago with RNFF. And diving into the wonderful world of trade media.
And we know each other because we are both in Columbus, Ohio
Yes.
currently. And I have a client here, and Kelley has actually been out to meet with my client in person, and I came to just for fun, just to and so we know each other that way. But today Kelley is just joining me out of the goodness of her heart because I asked her, and I know she's an expert on this topic, and I was excited that to have her here. So
Well, thank you. I'm really, like I said, yeah, I'm really excited to be here and chat about all things B2B and looking forward to it.
yeah, we are heavily B2B today, and we are, the topic today is trade media and what is trade media? How do you work with trade media? Why does it matter? Because I feel like sometimes, and I say this with love because I think it's very important, but sometimes people tend to maybe look down a little bit on trade media, like they really want to be in the Wall Street Journal or whatever. So I'm like,
Right.
well, your audience probably is more likely looking at the trade publication potentially than a big publication like that, but we'll talk about it. So and also please ask questions if anyone has questions about anything we're talking about, trade media, anything for Kelley. Please feel free to ask the question. We'll do our best to get to it. I'm going to kind of dive in with the questions that I have, and then we'll see where this takes us. All right. So our first question is how I'm going to put it up on the screen. How are trade publications different from other types of media?
As I said in my introduction, my primary background, and I have spent the majority of my career outside of this of trade media. The last 5 years, I have been entrenched in the trade media world, and it is really vastly different. You kind of touched on it. A lot of your clients, they probably, of course, everybody would love to be the front page of, the New York Times or something of that nature. But the value of trade media is it is really two different voices, for different audiences. So it's kind of like I like to think of it sort of as mirroring traditional beat reporting. I got my start in the world of newspapers, which I like to tell people are the original handheld devices. But Back then, I had a beat, which was a very niche, narrow, dedicated sort of field. And B2B media is kind of the same thing. My beat nowadays is refrigerated and frozen processing and manufacturing. So, the difference in trade media obviously is you're speaking to a smaller audience, of course, but you're speaking to an audience that is absolutely 100% engaged. So, it's definitely it's the, the difference between hitting a target and hitting a bullseye and hitting a, a wide open field. It's your audience is going to be there for whatever particular publication we're talking about. So, in my world, I work for BNP Media, is our parent org, and we have about 40 different trade brands uh, in a variety of different industries. So, in the food and bev world, we have about 9 brands right now. So I'm just one of 9. We're all kind of sisters and brothers, and we work together in the same ecosystem. But where I'm really focused on cold and frozen and the challenges and the differentiation there in that market. I have peers who are similarly focused on dairy foods. We have a brand called National Provisioner, which is exclusively protein and meat processing. So, and then we have a brand like Food Engineering, which is a little bit further upstream, but that's talking specifically about things like plant operations, design of facilities and manufacturing technologies, things of that nature. And some of that I do touch on, but the difference is it's got to be in a cold or frozen environment. So that's where, with a trade pub, you are really drilling down to what makes that specific industry, that specific market unique from its peers.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely, and again, it is probably more likely that if you are selling to, somebody who's, in that realm, they're more
Right.
likely to be reading very specific niche publications, especially if they are trying to keep up on trends or maybe they're looking at solutions or,
Right.
they're just trying to keep up with what's going on, so it makes a lot of sense, and it's really important, and we'll talk there are other reasons it's important, we're gonna talk about that in a little bit too, um, so the next question is okay, so and this well, this is exactly what I was saying. So trade publications could sometimes, be overlooked in lieu of coverage in more mainstream publications. So and we've kinda talked about it already, but it's so vital for B2B companies, because that's where their audience is spending time.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the easiest ways for me to relate this is when I talk to my friends who are not in the world, not only not in the media world, but in my world, the F&B world. There are companies that, Michelle, you and I work with every day, who are major players in their industry, but they are not kitchen table household names.
Right.
Uh, so, when I tell my friends, I was comparing 2 cold storage providers, and I said, well, they're like, how can I relate this? I said, they're like the Pepsi and Coke, you know, of that particular market. But they are not household names the way Pepsi and Coke are.
Yeah.
And so I think particularly, every industry is going to probably say this, but the food and beverage industry really has its own language, and in many cases, its own alphabet. There's acronyms for everything. There, there are certain cadences of languages and phrases and things that I had certainly never heard until I entered this world. And
Yeah.
just again, terminology and things that you're not ever going to get in a mass media kind of publication. The difference also in comes into play also with the people that do the kind of work that you and I do, and my peers here at BNP. And um, I certainly love my peers in commercial media, and I, like I said, was one of them for a long time. But they get to cover a lot of things all of the time, and I cover, you know, our funnels are very different. Our news funnels are different,
Mhm.
and so what ends up happening is when you stick with a B2B or an industry long enough, you get to learn that language, you get to learn those nuances, and so you become more of a subject matter expert. And so when you are taking a commercial reporter through a, let's say, a new plant tour, their questions are going to be very different from the questions that I'm going to ask you as someone who's speaking for manufacturing and processing, because I'm going to want to ask about the nuances of the equipment and automation and things that that quite frankly my peers in commercial media, and no disrespect to them, but they don't, you know, you don't know what you don't know. And
Right.
so they have no, I was on a tour last year of an ice cream manufacturer um, in Illinois, and local TV was there, and they took us through as a group. So everybody went, trade media, local media, politicians, everybody went through as a group, and we had one big Q&A, and the questions were very vastly different, as you can imagine.
Yes.
You know, based on what's my angle and what story I'm trying to tell and who I'm my
Yeah.
audience is versus that local nightly reporter. So
Yeah.
um, yeah, it's definitely, you know, it's and then, you know, the other thing is when you're speaking to like a consumer audience, um, we probably in some respects with food want to know the same thing. You know, for example, things like clean label and and protein and all of these things around formulation are really in the news right now. They're in the headlines certainly, and the consumer, those things are top of mind for the consumer. But the consumer is going to the store and just wants to be able to see your label, you know, and see your packaging claim and try your product. And
Mhm.
whereas if you tell me, Kelley, editor in chief of refrigerated and frozen foods, if you say, "Hey, we have this new formulation, you know, and it's got higher protein," I'm going to have a couple of follow up questions, you know, and they're going to they're going to have things nothing to do with what that consumer cares about. I'm going to say, okay, well, you know, what kind of protein? Where are you sourcing it? You know, what was the R&D process like? Did you have to change equipment? How did that impact your manufacturing
Yep.
process? Because as I said, once you get into this industry, you realize that it really, really is um, a delicate balance of art and science. Uh,
Mhm.
and that for a lot of times the consumer might think, oh, well, you know, they're just throwing protein into everything nowadays. And a trade journalist like myself knows that it's not that easy. So,
Yeah.
you know, there are no decisions that are ever made like that in my industry overnight or on a whim. So,
Yeah, and it's fascinating, right? I mean, I feel like a nerd sometimes because I'm really like before I started working with, food processing clients, I had no idea like what went into my food, right? Like
right.
it's pretty interesting. Like
I tell people all the time, especially because of the many great experiences I've had the opportunity and really the blessing to have throughout my career. I do tell people all the time though, look, I've covered crime and city council and I'm telling you, ice cream and frozen pizza are way are way better any day. Uh,
Yes, right? Because I
so,
think that's another thing. I mean, I know from the PR side, I know of, pros who would think, some of this stuff is, like, boring, and
right.
I think it's really fascinating, and I really get into it because I think, again, like, being in the factory, going on a tour of the shop floor, like, see ho and understanding, yeah, if you change up your formulation, then you're gonna have to change the way the equipment, is set up to make the product, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of decisions that go into it and just a lot more than, the average person probably thinks, and I'm sure the people that know me are bored hearing me talk about it, but I think it's really interesting, so
No one wants to go grocery shopping with me. We'll put it that way. I don't even want to go at this point. I don't even want to go grocery shopping with me anymore because I'm spending like all this time like, and not only I'm like, oh, who made the packaging? You know, what's the packaging made of? So
I
I'm just
know.
so far down the rabbit hole with, um, because I tell people when I go to the grocery store, it's market research. So,
Yeah, no, truly, because I mean and I would this is off topic a little bit, but the space in the frozen and refrigerated sections of the store is limited, right? So
right.
it's these products that get that space, they have to sell so many or they have to perform well or they're probably not gonna continue, to carry as much. I mean, that's
Right. I mean, that's the whole. I will tell you, to plug for my neck of the woods. I will tell you that the next time you go to the grocery store, the if you walk the store, the perimeter, which is the cold section and the frozen section, that is what's growing. So
okay.
if my our local Kroger here, many of them are under renovations. If you the next time, I would challenge your viewers, the next time you go to your local grocery store, start watching and look at how many cold cases have been added, and then also not where, not necessarily where you might expect. So we're starting to see little cold cases pop up in ambient aisles, like coffee
Yeah,
creamer next to the coffee, or the refrigerated dog pet food in the dog and cat food aisle with the
yeah.
ambient stuff. So all of that is cold and frozen. So just
I think I saw that in the pasta aisle maybe. There was, like,
yes,
some refrigerated pasta where
the
the
pasta
box.
sauces, yes,
Yeah,
and they'll merchandise the some of the cheese and like the or pesto and
yeah.
so
So
yeah,
that's interesting too.
it's a fun time to definitely to be in this industry. We'll put it that way.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm very interested in this. I think more people need to, get into it. Anyway, so let's talk about, if you are pitching, editors of trade publications, what type of news and stories are make the best, to pitch to somebody like you?
So I think my first piece of advice would be to know your audience. And by that I mean know your trade audience, because even though we are trade media, and this might surprise some people, I know it surprised me when I got into this side of the business. There's still a lot of nuance in trade media. So there are food publications that focus more on the financial business side of just food and bev. There are publications that focus, heavier into the um, in-depth, maybe scientific PhD, like scholarly level journals and things of that nature. So
Mhm.
I think that's probably my number one piece of advice, is to make sure that your pitch matches the publication that you're pitching it to. Um, and all that to say, I get a fair amount of pitches that are for things that are not in my coverage area. For example, they might be ambient, and so that's where before I talked about at BNP, I have peers who certainly cover ambient food production and R&D and things of that nature.
Mhm.
And this is where trade media can really also come to help your brand, because um, there's lots of places to put that ambient coverage, but
Mhm.
refrigerated and frozen foods is not one of them. So
Right.
I would say probably like 10% of the pitches I get are probably automatically I just have to DQ,
Yeah.
because they just do not fit my coverage area. And being in food and beverage, it's like, review our restaurant, or would you like to interview this chef? Also, no. Despite the fact a lot of my friends, I think they think I'm like a food critic or something. But So I would say that's probably my number one piece of advice.
Yeah.
Yeah, is to make sure that it kind of matches, and then from there it's like, um, does it have value? Does it have a hook? Is there a timeliness to it? Is there, you know, for me, I always want to know the basics: the who, what, when, where, why, and how.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, often, I mean, and again, this is gonna be something else, that comes up at times, is like people will frown on press releases, but working with trade media, often the press release is what they need, want, or ask you for. So if you don't have a press release, then you have to put together the information anyway. So I'm like, of course yes, you would wanna write a press release if you had a new product, for example, of course, because it is gonna answer all those questions. And then we'll talk about visuals too,
Right.
because I think it's really important. But yeah, I mean, the basics have to be there. So, um another question I had about this is you mentioned, sometimes you get pitches that aren't a fit for you, but then you have, your fellow editors at the other publications under your umbrella. Do you ever pass off a pitch to somebody else or you probably don't have time to do this, but do you ever, like, reply and say, "Hey, this would be a better fit for this person or this editor?" Do you ever do that?
And I can't speak for my other friends. I have peers who work at other B2B companies, and they are great people. So I'm sure that they are as well. But I definitely we do here. We have a cohesive F&B team that is trying to look at things holistically, and
Mhm,
there are a lot of natural overlaps. For me, the probably the most obvious one is dairy foods. If you think about how much of the cold and refrigerated and frozen, if you think about how much of those cases are made up of dairy products, there's a lot of natural overlap there. Um,
mhm.
so I definitely do. We pass stories and pitches, and we make introductions for each other, pretty frequently. So you and I were talking before, offline before this started. I jokingly, I kind of call myself the cold chain queen now. So if it's cold or frozen, and somebody else gets it, they better be sending it to me. Yeah, we'll put
That's
it
right.
that way.
Well, and you're very kind, and I will say, I've worked with a lot of, editors throughout my career in PR, and I mean, not often they won't take the time to, help you especially if you're new, working with a client or new to an industry, those people are not as, they might need a little extra advice or something, so it's really
Right.
nice when editors take time to do that, but of course, we know you're busy and we know not everybody has time, but we appreciate it, so Um, this kinda dovetails on to the last question, but, what makes a pitch stand out? And, you mentioned how a lot of times there are some immediate, disqualifying factors that in something a pitch you receive, but what are you really looking for? Is there anything else that kinda makes something stand out to you?
Well, I would say I probably get about roughly a dozen a week. So let's, give or take. And like I said, probably three or four of those right off the bat, I can disregard. Um, I would say there's a few things. We're always looking for unique stories. We're always looking for something untold. In my in my specific industry right now, there's a lot of emerging, what we like to call category disruption. So that's an obvious space, where I'm going to probably be receptive to that. Another thing is, anytime you can provide access, particularly to a B&B publication, anytime you can provide access, whether it's like something like a plant tour, or Michelle, you talked earlier, one of your clients is based in Columbus, and they are an OEM, and it was great for me to go out there. It wasn't for a specific piece of content, but it was great industry education for me. And they're in our backyard, and so it was really easy for me to go out there and see their facility firsthand and get a better understanding, um, of how some of these pieces of equipment are built, how they operate, how they're repaired, how they're maintained. Another great opportunity is, setting up things on, like, at trade shows, and because you only get into a handful of these facilities, usually a year if you're lucky, and it's really impressive to see a lot of this, equipment and things set up and either operational or somewhat operational. It helps our understanding, and I think it helps provide better content, and ultimately a better experience for our audience. And what I'm trying to do at the end of the day is just provide um, clear, concise, reliable, independent information, for frozen and refrigerated manufacturers and processors. And a lot of times they want to see um, what their competition is doing. So, and not necessarily, to that end, not that I'm giving away the family secrets, there's no, I'm not disclosing what the 11 herbs and spices are. Would never seek to do that, but but once you can get in and kind of see how the sausage is made, so to speak, for
Yeah,
lack of a better description, it really does make a tremendous difference. So
yeah,
I would say anytime a pitch has anything of that, of that caliber, or, and the other thing is access. For me, I want to talk to the C-suite largely, and I want to talk to the folks in R&D, and the folks running the packaging lines, and it also depends on the publication as well. When I talk about, like, my sister pubs, food engineering, they really want to talk to the operations folks. Um,
yeah,
we have a brand called Packaging Strategies. So of course all they want to do is, they want to talk to the packaging engineers, and the
right.
high level people that are helping to make the decisions, and ultimately bring new products to market.
Yeah. You brought up a couple things that are really good tips I love because trade shows, first of all, you're there, the companies are there. The PR person can get a list of the press that will be at the show if they're exhibiting, if the company exhibiting. So you can, it's very, it's very easy. They will offer, they will give it to you. You have to ask often, but they will give it to you. And you can contact the editors ahead of time, set up 15, 20 minutes or whatever in the booth, have the editor come to the booth and talk to your spokesperson, your CEO, whoever it is. And that is a great, even if it's not, I think this is another thing, and you've mentioned a couple times, even if it's not for a specific story right now, it's a relationship building, it's important for that. And then it's going to be, that relationship is going to be real because you've met in person. That just makes a huge difference, right? So if you were working on a story, a few months later and you thought, "Oh yeah, I talked to Joe, Blow at the show," you're going to be able to
Right.
say, "Yeah, he would be a great he would probably have a comment for this." And then, that would end up with the company featured in a story or included in a story. So that's a really important tip, right?
Yeah, and I would say that I would, yes, I agree with you, and I know I think one of your questions later on, has to do with like people entering the field,
Yeah.
and I would say that things like that are really invaluable because, and I'm going to tell you, it's also no different. It's largely no different in the commercial media world.
Mhm.
If I was working on a story that wasn't a breaking news piece, but if I was working on a story where I needed a subject matter expert, um, you're going to rely on who you know, and who you can call, and sort of, it's really no different in the B2B industry world. The timelines are probably much different. The timelines are usually much longer. But
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, your client is a great example. Every year I meet up with them at a trade show,
Yeah.
um, just to touch base. And when I go to probably about a half dozen trade shows a year. typically when I go to them, I may have a future piece of content in mind, but chances are good that I don't. There's a really good chance that I'm just looking to make a connection, build a relationship,
Mhm.
and see how we could work together potentially in the future. And
Yeah.
then what happens is, eventually your client has published a few a few uh, case studies and whatnot
Yeah.
through us.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and that's a great example because they are sort of, and then you'll say, hey, I have a case study, and it absolutely relates to your category. So for me, that's a no brainer because I already have an established kind of relationship with you, Michelle, with the client that you're representing. So laying the groundwork,
Yeah.
and particularly in this industry where it takes, let's say, 2 years, give or take, to build a new facility, a food production facility. And it's probably a year to two at least of planning before that.
Yeah.
Um, so if you're talking about me wanting to cover, let's say something like new food facilities,
Yeah.
that's not sort of a 24-hour news cycle turnaround. That's going to be me kind of laying the groundwork and waiting,
Yeah.
um, and hoping that the relationship comes to fruition at the end.
Yeah.
And typically they do.
Yeah, and I just feel like, I mean, often, I feel like, and again, this is just kind of a more general PR 101 type of thing, but, like, I feel like sometimes, editors and PR pros kinda have they don't always have the most positive of a relationship or, like, but I always feel like it can be really positive, and, I mean, I feel like if you came to me and asked me for a resource that I could give you, I would bend over backwards to do that for you because we know each other and we have a relationship. And so, I mean, there is something to be gained on the editorial side, as well as, the PR pro. I always feel like we're asking more of the editor, but then there can be a give and take there a little bit too, I think. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, and then the other thing that you said that I think is really important is, offer up your experts, right? So, I mean, for us and with the client we're talking about, it is the CEO because he enjoys that, that's he likes doing those, interviews and those discussions, and he loves talking to people and, he's got a big
Right.
personality. That's how he is. But, you can always, if you have a spokesperson that's an expert, from another, division of the company or somebody else in the C-suite, just be sure that you're putting the people in front of the editor that really can talk and answer questions, very specific questions that a trade editor might ask if you are meeting with them. So I think that's really important too. Um, we have kind of covered what makes you disregard a pitch, so I'm not gonna post that question 'cause we've kinda talked about that. We've talked about relationship building. One question I have, we've talked about some ways you can build a relationship, but do you think that having a relationship makes a difference, when people are pitching you? I mean, you don't I wouldn't think that you would treat it differently, but maybe you can speak to this a little bit.
No, I don't think it has. Put it this way, it shouldn't have a dramatic difference. A good pitch and a good story should stand out and will be a good piece of content, regardless. But that being said, it's human nature. So when I see somebody, like when I see your name, oh, an email from Michelle. Okay, I know it's going to be something relevant first off, because Michelle knows me, so I know it's going to be something relevant. It might not be earth shattering, and it might not need my attention right away, but I can at least, okay, this is going to be, this is going to be worth my time. Kind of when you're leading, through that initial inbox every morning. But no, I would say that building a relationship often might happen after a pitch. You might, uh, and I've had people pitch. I just recently had a PR woman from California pitch me a really great story. I was on board, and the company that she was pitching backed out, and that's
Yeah.
fine. I don't hold that against her, certainly. Um, we just, and we've spoken before on the phone. Um, and so I really hope that the next time she has a pitch, that we can, work together, and that story can come to fruition. Um, but
Yeah.
ultimately, no, having a relationship doesn't affect the outcome of eventual coverage or anything like that.
Right. Okay. Yeah, no, I think that's really important too, because I think a lot of times people get hung up on that. And I mean, I know when I talk to prospective clients, sometimes they want to know, like, who do you know? Which editors do you have a relationship with? And I'm
Right.
like, well, it doesn't really matter if you, the client, you, the company doesn't have, you don't have the goods, you're not bringing anything interesting to the table as far as
Right.
customers, products, case studies, solutions, whatever it is, you've got to have something there, or even if I had a relationship, the editor is not gonna say, "Yeah, sure, we'll just publish anything." 'Cause I mean, you have told me no before, so and that's cool,
It
like,
does.
I mean, does it make sense?
It
Like, it
does.
doesn't.
Yeah, it does. It is. I mean, I had to actually, I got a great pitch this morning, but I had just published a case study from their division recently, and so,
Yeah, yeah,
same kind of thing.
yeah,
I had to turn it down just for the sake of, um, I hate to say it, but for the sake of fairness. I try
yeah,
to,
yeah, yeah,
we
yeah,
try to be very cognizant of that, and she understood. I said, oh.
yeah. Well, it's a mutual
I wish this
respect
had come a few
again.
months ago. Right, right, right.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, like, yeah. So, I mean, and I try not to do that, but the other thing that sometimes happens is because, I would pitch multiple pubs under that umbrella. Sometimes a pitch is a better fit for one than another, and they're not all gonna run it. So, that's something, again, it's kind of a nuance, but, like, I get it because this is what I do. So, but anyway, don't take it personally always if an editor turns you down on the PR side. So, um so we talked about, like, how do you work with the editor. I wanna talk a little bit about how do you work with a publication, most effectively? Obviously, we've talked about pitching, stories, and what about other ways? Are there other things that we could do or we could talk to our clients about doing?
I mean, one of the questions that I get asked a lot of times is, uh, even when I pitch people and I say, "Hey, I'd like to do a story on you on XYZ," and a
Mhm.
lot of times they say, "Is there a cost? Is there a cost associated?"
Yeah,
And I always say, yeah, no. So, you know,
right.
we still have that separation of church and state, so to speak. I am still doing editorial work and editorial based content. Um, However, alongside of that, there is an opportunity in B2B. There is an opportunity to do obviously different types of, uh, communication and marketing. So there's a lot
Mhm.
of times where the best example of this is I have done a few podcasts in the past. They were strictly editorial, and I don't even believe I was aware that this company had was an existing client of ours. Sometimes I'm aware that they might be an advertiser with our parent company.
Mhm.
And oftentimes I'm not, because like I said, I'm in my cold chain world over here. So um, there's been times when editorial content has been repurposed and later used on the marketing side, on the paid side. So, and that's one of the best ways I think that the a true kind of partnership or a true cohesive model. You know, if you did have clients that wanted that were looking for non-editorial opportunities in
Mhm,
B2B, there's a way that they can coexist and walk alongside of one another
mhm.
without it being a pay to play type of scenario. Because that is, yeah, that's definitely not what I do as editor, and none of our the editorial folks here on my side of things
No.
at BNP. You know, that's certainly not what we're about. Uh, but there are things, there are companies in which we do editorial pieces, and then they may be existing advertisers. They may become advertisers at a later point, um,
Yeah.
but usually it has very minimal to do with my interaction, you know, on an editorial side. Other than the fact that, you know, hopefully I'm representing our brand and our company well, but there is no sort of, you know, paying for access or you know, guiding the voice kind of thing.
Yeah, well, a couple things, because there are obviously, your company would never do this. You would never do this. There are a lot of them that might be doing that, and I kind of understand it because, like, I know some of them are struggling and so forth, and I guess it makes sense. But I think it makes clients really gun shy sometimes because they're like, well, they don't understand the difference, and sometimes those companies will pitch directly to the C-suite and try to, like, appeal to their ego to get them to pay for something. And I'm always like, let's, look at if you have money to spend on the paid side, let's look at what makes sense because it probably makes more sense to be working with somebody, a trade publication or the trade media than random person that got in touch and has started a publication that, is pay to play. So yeah.
Right.
I
And that's what I mean too, where there are ways to, you know, maybe there's a great piece of content where there was an interview or a piece that featured your CEO or featured your CFO or, you know, something of that nature. And then down the line, you want to amplify that
Yes.
through,
Yeah. Yep.
through a paid program. That's, you know, that's a different sort of, it's a different sort of way of looking at things because also you're then, you know, you're amplifying, you're boosting, whatever word you want to use, you're helping to spread a piece of legitimate editorial content that was you know, that was standalone, you know, on its own, and was not guided in any way
Yeah.
from the the advertorial side of things.
Right, and I mean, like I said, if I always encourage clients, if they can, I mean, obviously, I'm there to help them with our media primarily, but if they have budget to spend on the paid side, it makes a lot of sense, and, but here is a real another question that I have, because sometimes I feel like if you can't get in front of an editor, like, you just don't get a reply, right? And you're trying to, like, get the client really wants to be in a publication. So sometimes I wonder if they do work on the paid side, if that might get them more attention, but I'm sure it's probably on a case by case basis.
Yeah, I would say it's probably really more of a case by case basis. And it's probably going to come after probably some time. You know, I've only had this happen a handful of times where one of our sales strategists will say, "Hey, you know, I have a client and they would really like, you know, could you think about featuring them in X Y Z?"
Yeah,
Um, and that's the best way for me personally because oftentimes I might not have known. Like I said, I might not have known that you had this client, or um, with us with 9 brands, um, they might not be advertising in refrigerated and frozen foods, and I might not know that they exist, but they might be a really good industry voice for a topic that I'm working on. You know, so we could take sustainability is kind of an easy one, and it's certainly a very buzzy topic right now. And so there's a lot of companies in food and bev that are in the space of sustainability. So whether it be, water, reducing your water usage,
Mhm.
renewable energy, grid reliance, things of this nature. There's a lot of companies, and some of them are probably our advertisers, and they might make great sources for me on the editorial side for an article on, let's say, like sustainable plant construction. So
Mhm.
there are times when the editors will reach out to sales and say, hey, I'm doing a story on a very, very narrow kind of, topic. Does anybody have any any content? Are there any advertisers that work in this space? Um, and that's probably the way that I see it happening more frequently. It's
Okay.
usually driven by the editor that's looking for somebody that we already know, and that's not necessarily just because they're an advertiser, but it's,
Right.
oh, we have a relationship with them as a company,
Mm.
and they're probably going to be more willing to speak to me, or get a C-suite quote than if they had no relationship with our company at all.
Yeah. See, that just makes sense to me. It's common sense because I feel like this is a little bit of a taboo question or topic sometimes, and I'm like, "Well, now just think
Right.
about it, though." Because, like, if it were you, of course, if somebody were, I don't know, you just it's a relationship. It's a little bit of a different kind of relationship, but it can still maybe make a difference if you really are, striking out on the editorial side. But also, you kind of have to look at what you're pitching. Is it a fit? Because that, at the end of the day, that really should be the biggest thing. But sometimes I don't think a little of both can be
Yeah.
helpful. So, yeah, thank you for talking about that because I've said that before, and other PR people will look at me like, "Well, you should never say that." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, but it's kind of a something that happens, and I think we all know that, so I don't know." I don't think it's
I'll just it is interesting. I have experienced, um, before. I have experienced kind of the opposite. I have experienced pressure to not, talk to someone because they were not advertising.
okay.
And my pushback on that was, again, I'm on the editorial side, and so uh, I'll use the Pepsi Coke scenario, and this was kind of like the Pepsi to the Coke, if you were, and I pushed back and I said, oh, that's not the way I believe in doing business. And so,
Yeah.
and long story short, years later, we have rebuilt that relationship. So on both the editorial, and the advertising side.
Mhm.
Um, but but a lot of that was due to the editorial side just saying, we're not going to blacklist people, because they
Yeah.
turned you down for advertising. Like that's, I wouldn't be doing my job, as an editor, and I wouldn't be serving the industry that way. So,
Well,
it
see,
can work both ways. It's
yeah,
interesting.
I've had an editor tell me they won't do editorial because the client is paying, which is, that's the I've only had that happen one time, and it's
That's
I'm like,
interesting.
"Wow, okay,
Huh.
well." It's interesting. Anyway, we've got about 10 minutes, and I've got several questions I think are important to get to. I'm gonna skip over a couple, but, this next question, I think, and I don't know, like, obviously, you and I are not, search experts, but I feel like GEO, which is AI, driven search, right? SEO, GEO, blah, blah, blah. Um, we feel like I feel like trade coverage is more important because companies are understanding that often the GEO, the AI-driven search, is citing the articles in the trade publications because they see that as a source, an expert source on a topic. So, are you what do you think about that?
So I have to throw in another one, which is AEO, also, which kind of
Yeah.
stands in the middle of those.
Yeah,
the answer engine optimization.
right.
I will tell you that we here at BNP Media are fully embracing this. We B2B media, you're absolutely right. We are kind of experiencing, we're having a bit of a moment. Um,
Mhm.
not to brag, but if you do um, ask ChatGPT a question about refrigerated and frozen foods in the United States, chances are good you're going to get something that we have published.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's hugely important. It is really, yeah, it's impacting all sorts of things. It's impacting the way we're packaging content. It's impacting the way that we're writing headlines. It's impacting, um, oh gosh, I mean, maybe it's the other thing is it's doing is it's really putting a tremendous amount of importance on all of the possible men. So, I know, Michelle, you said, what about, photos and photo captions and um,
yeah, yeah.
all of those pieces of data are hugely important now. So, um, it's really it's something that we think about every day. And it is really becoming important to be cited. Yeah, it's crazy the statistics on year over year change. It's revolutionizing um, anybody that runs a website, and certainly we have a website. Um,
Yeah,
we're all feeling it from a standpoint of visitors to our website because the Googles of the world, the search engines, are taking a lot of those direct hits. They're taking that experience away because the user is getting their answer right there in that
yeah,
AEO or GEO generated response. And it is fascinating because it used to be all about clicks to your website and time spent on your site and things of that nature. And now we are definitely seeing a push. You're absolutely right, especially in B2B. Um, if you can be cited, in that immediate answer box from Gemini or whoever your client, your chat client may be,
yep.
um, it's becoming huge. And one of the areas too, it's hard to quantify is that it's becoming important for brand awareness, brand loyalty. Again, we talked about how one of the things that I want to do in my day today is talk to subject matter experts. So experts can be huge um, for trust.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love it because I feel like again, I you know, I have been working with B2B companies and trade media for so long, and I just love to see this getting its day in the sun. I'm like, "Oh," because a lot of times, I can't tell
Yeah,
you, look down on it a little bit or like be like, "Well, it's just the trades." And I'm like, "Well, now and now
the first time
is
the first time we put a prompt into Chat GPT and it kicked back, I think two out of the three citations something up real straight, and it was one of those things like, "Ooh, the teacher called on you."
Yeah, right?
But it was
Yeah.
really cool. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. No, we've been living this life for a long time, but now it's gonna be like, okay, everybody is seeing the importance, and I will say, the best time to start, working in PR and working with earned media and trade media was probably 5 years ago, 10 years ago, but the second best time is today, is now, so you've gotta get started if you haven't done it, but yeah. We just touched on visuals, and I know we're running out of time here, but I really think it's important because again, this is another thing because people will say, "Well, how do we get in front of this publication? How do we get in front of this editor? How can we get them to cover us?" if you invest some resources into nice, high resolution visuals taken in your plant, taken of your products, they're really important, right? I mean,
Yeah, they're hugely important, particularly again in this era, in this industry, in food and bev. It's um, nothing against Getty Images, love the Getty, but uh, it's really hard to find really industry specific images on Getty, particularly when we're talking about detailed or patented, processing equipment or
yeah,
things of this nature. So I totally agree. And there are ways to photograph and video and 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 shoot your machinery and your facility without, let's say, compromising any name brands or things of that nature. So and people like me, again, in B2B media, are very amenable to that. We understand that um, a private label processor, for example, not one of his clients are. So we understand about nuances around photography, but I absolutely
mhm.
agree with you. It's definitely one of the probably the hanging fruit. The easiest you could do today would be to get some high quality visuals and video if you have it. Absolutely.
Yeah, and if you take it with your phone, this is just a tip, save it in the highest resolution possible, because that's another thing. Sometimes the client will send photos, but the resolution is a little low, and that's tough. So, if you're gonna take time and maybe even
Right.
hire a photographer or videographer, wow, that's an idea. Make sure that, you're getting very high resolution. If you hire a professional, you're probably not gonna have to worry about that as much, but I know a lot of people like to do it themselves, so and do you care if it's attached or someone sends a link to, like, a Google Drive or a Dropbox link, or does it matter to you? 'Cause, this question comes up a lot too, in my world.
No, no. Typically, no. It doesn't matter. I work with all kinds of different Dropbox file sharing sites. So
Okay.
as long as you can get me, the image, and as long as we have permission to use it, that's another big
Yep.
one.
Yeah.
We are focused on too, is that permission, the attribution, the cut line, things of that nature. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's important. They have to have permission to use the photo. Well, if they took the photo, that's almost like, well, then they own the photo, so that's and never send stock photos. I've seen that happen too. I'm like, "No."
Right.
Why would you do
A
that?
lot. A lot.
Really? Isn't that funny? I mean, I just find that, like, again, a lot of it is common sense, but maybe common sense isn't as common as I like to think that it should be, so Um, but yeah, no, thank you, because I talk about that all the time, and I'm like,
And
"It's
I always
really
say thanks,
funny."
but I can't.
Yeah, but just thinking about it ahead of time too, because if you only have one shot at getting visuals of the client's facility or something, like, you should make sure that you're capturing visuals that you can use, and maybe that does mean that they can't show the customer's name or something like that. So, people are obviously there's a lot of privacy concerns about that, so, yeah, it's just something to think about, because again, it seems like a very overlooked piece of pitching stories, because editors like to have a pretty picture because it draws the reader in, and obviously, it just tells the story in and of itself if it's well done, right? I mean, it helps with that, so so, um, we are at our hour, and I don't know if there's anything else you wanna add. I had more questions, but we had such a great conversation, and I'm gonna stop asking questions, so
Thank you so much for having me. And if anyone, feel free to add me on LinkedIn, and yeah, it's great to be here and answer some questions, and I'd love to come back.
Well, that would be great, and I really appreciate your time and your willingness to do this, and I know, again, I'm so grateful that we do have a relationship because, it was a little awkward for me to ask because I wasn't sure, how open you would be to it, but I'm really appreciative that you, were so candid and shared with us, your process and how you work and all of that. So I really wanna thank you so much, and I'm putting Kelly's LinkedIn, in the chat right now, and, I wanna thank you so much, Kelly, for being here, and thanks everybody, for listening, watching, and I'll be back on, the, 25th, and I will see you then. Thanks so much.